So welcome back, everybody. This is week 5, so you guys are all committed now. So really appreciate you coming back, and I wanted to touch upon a couple of things that are not in the book, but I think would be useful to talk about. There was a question that was posed last week, which was about agency, the sense of agency, or like why do we choose to do the things that we choose to do? And before we talk about that, it'll be good to kind of talk about, just go back and recollect what avidya is, which is like ignorance. So we touched upon, the whole problem of the mind is that it is ignorant of who you are. Right now, the mind has a certain understanding that you are something that you are not. And this false belief that you are your personality, you are this limited body, you are your emotions, you are your brilliant ideas, you are all of those things. Those are some ideas that are presented to the mind, and the mind believes that. And that is the ignorance, and the Sanskrit term is avidya, which is ignorance. And there's actually another term which is called Maya, which I think a lot of people misunderstand what that means. There's this Indian phrase where, like, this world is Maya, like sab kuch Maya hai. That's like the Hindi, which literally means everything is Maya. And people tend to think as this world is unreal, and it's not real, but that's not actually what it means. It means there's a subtler understanding. It basically means that it is not what you think it is. That is what Maya means. And Maya essentially is also another name for this deep intelligence that exists, and this deep energy that exists in this world. And due to this energy, the mind tends to believe in certain things and certain ideas. So Maya is like, another word for Maya is Maya Shakti, which is, it's like a great power of this universe. And because of this great power, we believe in certain ideas, and we tend to take them as real, and we forget what is actually the true idea. So we have, because of this Maya Shakti, we believe in false realities, which is, my personal sense of self is true. So that is what ignorance and Maya is. And because of Maya, there is a bunch of things like, vasanas and some of the things that we touched upon, like in the last few classes. So I think one thing would be good to talk about again is what is a vasana, because this is such a core concept in this work. And so again, so vasana is any impression that is left in the unconscious, which is due to an egoistic action. So anything that you do with a frame of mind where you are very sort of identified with the task that you're doing or something that you're experiencing, that creates a very powerful impression in your set of impressions. So you have a bundle of impressions, and within that bundle of impressions, one action that you do or one experience that you have will create a very powerful impression, because you think that that experience or that object or that idea has joy-giving properties. So something like, I want to, if you have a child or something, I want to do X thing for my child. Now that idea becomes very powerful because now you're identified with this relationship here. And due to that relationship, that idea or that thing that you're doing is going to have a very different feel compared to some other action that you may do, like going for a walk. So that's how vasanas are essentially built. So in order to understand how vasanas get created, this work describes there's this concept called gunas, which are qualities of the mind. And in order to understand this, I think it'll be good to go over that, even though it's not really in the book. I think it'll be a good, it'll be really good value to kind of cover that concept. So guna is basically a quality of the mind. And there's basically three kinds of gunas. So the first guna is tamas, which means ignorance. And when we touched upon vasana, it has two properties. It has the veiling power, where where you think you don't know who you are, and then there's the second power of it, which is the projecting power. So on this ignorance, I project ideas about whatever it is. So in the example of the snake and the rope, I look at the rope and I think it is a snake, so I don't recognize it. So the real quality of the snake or the rope is veiled from me. And on this lack of recognizing that it's a rope, I project qualities about the snake. It's a big snake, it's a small snake, it's a scary snake, it's a poisonous snake. Those are the projecting powers. So in the case of, so when describing in the case of your mind, when you're experiencing that, so tamas is the quality of not recognizing things for what they are. And tamas has qualities like laziness, ignorance, low energy. So whenever you wake up and you have ideas like I'm useless, I'm depressed, I'm sad, blah blah blah, that's the quality of tamas, which is your mind is clouded. It doesn't recognize who it is. And on this lack of recognition, I project really low energy sort of ideas about myself. Like I'm useless, I don't have low self-worth, all sort of things that make you stay in bed and not wake up and not get out. I know everyone at some point has felt those emotions, right? Where you wake up one day like, oh my God, I'm just like, my mind is just too thick right now. I just don't feel like doing anything today. I'm just going to lie in bed and do nothing. So that's in those moments, your mind is covered in tamas, which is this quality of ignorance, where you think you are the cloud, right? And you really believe it. And that's actually so there's basically three levels. So that's the lowest level, where because of this quality, you don't even do any action. You just stay in bed. I'm not going to do anything today. So that's tamas. And that kind of is the maps to the Vikshepa Shakti, which is the veiling power. So because of the veiling power, I believe in the veil, that I am, depressed or I am low energy. So that's tamas. From tamas, we move on to the second quality, the second guna, which is called rajas, which is this quality of being very active, but in an egocentric way, which is I am angry, so I will do an action. I am, I want to prove something to somebody, so I will do an action. I have all these ambitions where I want to become really rich because some idea that I had absorbed that, when I was young, that being rich is going to make me feel really powerful. So I'm going to pursue that idea because of this motivation. So that's the quality of rajas, where you're very active in this world, but those motivations for those activities is very egoistic, which is I want to do stuff, but I want to do it because of X. There's always this sort of motivation factor, which is not pure, which is not it doesn't feel light. It's sort of this contraction form of motivation. And most people in this world are motivated in that way, because that's how we receive information in society, which is you have to be X. You are valued if you are like X. So we all struggle to be like X, but all our actions that we're doing in this world is from that motivation. So that's the quality of rajas. So that's the mapping here is from rajas to vikshepa shakti. What's the other one? Vikshepa shakti, which is the projecting power. So if you are, if you don't recognize the snake, I mean, if you don't recognize a rope to be a rope and you think it's a snake, now if you start to do actions of like, I'm going to try to figure out how to kill the snake, or I'm going to figure out how to catch the snake. So that's the sort of actions we are starting to do from this rajasic standpoint, because I feel fear, or I feel unsafe, or I want to do something thinking that I'm going to solve some huge problem. It actually doesn't really exist in the case of the snake, right? There is no snake. But because now you've started to engage in all these actions, uh, you are in that rajasic state of mind where I'm going to do something. Um, and from rajas, there is this third quality, which is sattva. So in a lot of like, yogic, if you do like practice physical asana and stuff, they recommend that you have a sattvic lifestyle. I've always found that very funny. It's like sattvic lifestyle. But sattva basically means is this, um, where your mind is very clear, and you're just doing things because you're just doing them. So a good example is like, um, you're just going on a walk or something. If you, let's say you're going on a hike in a park, and you're talking to a friend, and you're like, you're just kind of like walking, you're doing a bunch of things, but all those things are just happening spontaneously, and there's no sort of a hidden agenda behind why you're doing certain things. Your mind is very clear, very light. You just have it, you're in the moment, you're just doing things. There's no sort of um, you know the root of those actions are not tied to something else. Most of the things are just happening in the now. So that's the sattva. So to recap, there's three qualities of mind. Tamas, which is ignorance, has the quality of laziness, a little like your mind is very cloudy, so you feel like depressed, and then from that you can move to rajas, which is activity. So I'm doing stuff, but I'm doing it out of ignorance. So in the example of this rope and the snake, trying to figure out why the snake came into my why is it here, like how do I get rid of it, all of those activity that you're doing, that's happening from a place of rajas. And then sattva is clear mind, where it's very pure. I'm just in the moment, and I'm in the now. uh, Cool. So now the question why I'm talking about all of this is because there's going to be questions about agency, which is, why do I do the things that I do? Uh, and do I really have choice? And do I really have free will? Those are kind of questions, because we are presented with the idea that you're the witness and everything is just happening in front of you. Then you're always going to question of like, do I really have any choice in anything that's happening to me? And the answer is, at least from this work, and these are all ideas that I'm presenting to you. Do not believe anything that I'm saying. Right? I'm just giving you ideas, and you have to stake that idea and see that if that is true for you. If it's not true, then don't believe it. Only take it as a hypothesis, and then in your own mind, in your own experience, try to see if that is true for you. Um, so in the case of agency, this work says that agency is defined by the combination of guna, which are these three qualities of mind, and karma, which is all the past actions that I've done. So whatever is happening to you in this moment is because of all the past actions that you have done, and what was the state of mind when you were doing those past actions. So today, if you are in a X job or whatever, why are you in that X job? Because in the past, a certain state of mind led you to apply for that job and get that job, and you're doing it well or you're doing it badly or whatever, and now in your present day, here you are with that in that place. um, and that means that the now you have a lot of power in the now to alter what happens in the future. um, so for example, um, when you're doing this work, a bunch of things are going to start to come up, which is once you start to pay attention to what is going on. So that's what we want to do. We just want to start paying attention to what exactly is happening, right? We want to be conscious when we are really happy, and we want to be really conscious when we're the opposite, which is we are really upset, and start to notice what is the state of mind, or like, why am I really upset? What exactly is going on? And in those moments, you'll start to see that, oh, it's this object that I'm really attached to, or this idea that I'm really attached to. Um, and in moments where you are, upset, our natural tendency tends to be to suppress or to avoid confronting that discomfort. Um, and what I recommend you to do is to just watch it. So, the analogy of being on the bank and watching the river flow, just watch it. Even though it's going to be uncomfortable, just watch the discomfort and just stay there. My teacher says, don't just do something, sit there. That's all you need to do. Just sit. It doesn't have to be with your eyes closed or anything. Just be conscious about what is going on. And you will just see that it's just energy that is flowing through your body. And eventually that energy is going to pass. And then what's going to happen is those ideas which, make you feel a certain way, the energy of those ideas will start to fade away. And then those ideas will start to become neutral, and you're not going to feel that sense of like contraction when those ideas flow by you again. So in the analogy of sitting on a bank and watching the river flow, there's a bunch of thoughts that are flowing through, right? There's like constantly thoughts that are flowing through, because the nature of the mind is to present ideas, and you're going to keep seeing those ideas and flowing through. But what happens is one of those ideas that you see in the water seems very appealing, or seems very attractive, or very repulsive. And we tend to like grab onto one of those ideas and, flow with that idea, hugging that idea in the water and flowing, and it's taking you wherever it takes you. But instead, we want to like sit back and just see that idea that, it is something that's very energetic, but don't get involved, but just watch it. And you'll see that the pressure, and here the idea here would be like a vasana, because, it's in the past, that idea I have indiscriminately, enjoyed that object. And I think that object has joy-giving properties or misery-producing properties. And now what we want to do is break this idea that it actually doesn't have any joy-producing or misery-producing. It's just my belief that it does. And this belief needs to be broken. And the only way it can break is that you don't engage with it. So that's the process. Any questions about this? Okay. So in the coming back to the concept of agency, we are doing things because of the past, and we will continue. And sometimes it's the force of the past is very strong, where you cannot not do what is being presented in front of you, right? So for example, you really love eating chocolate cake, right? And you know that you're not supposed to eat chocolate cake because it's like bad for you, or you have some sort of disease or whatever. But the thing is very strong. So how do you deal with that? There's two ways to do it. One is to eat it, right? But while you're eating it, be absolutely conscious of what you're doing. So, it could be in this case, smoking, eating a chocolate, but even if you're trying to quit smoking or something, but it's nothing wrong in smoking a cigarette. But while you're smoking the cigarette, be absolutely conscious of what you're doing. I'm just smoking a cigarette, just smoke the cigarette. And what's going to start to happen is that right now we are doing certain actions as responses to energy, which is, I feel discomfort, I want to do X. Eating cake is actually a response to something. It's not really that you love cake that much. It could be, just so happens that it's cake and it's harmful. So it's like you're thinking about it a lot more. But watching TV is another sometimes a response too, or which is not as harmful and is socially accepted to binge watch stuff, right? But it's equally the same uh, uh, structure of what's going on, which is I'm discontent, and my response to that discontent is doing X. It could be eating a cake, it could be smoking a cigarette, it could be watching TV. But what we want to start to do is stay with that discomfort, which is so that's one option, is to stay with the discomfort and don't do anything. And then the second option is to flow with it, because the power of that discomfort is too much. So you want to flow with it, but then be absolutely conscious of what's going on. And while you're smoking a cigarette, while you're eating the cake, or while you're watching the TV, only do that, because you will start to see that the object has absolutely no joy-giving or misery-producing properties. And slowly the power of the object or the experience is going to start to dissipate. So all we're doing is doing dissipation. We're like this expanded balloon, and we're just poking holes, and the air is being deflated. And you'll start to see that once the air is like, the balloon is like fairly small, then you can drop the entire structure of wanting to do and wanting to eat so it'll be very easy to stop to, when you have a feeling that I want to eat the cake, it's going to be very easy to say, okay, let's just pressure from the past. But in the beginning, it can be really hard to do that, because there's too much energy in that idea. Cool. So we're going to kind of go through this, but this is a good sort of mind and way to think about what is going on. Why do these thoughts have so much energy? They only have energy because we have given them energy in the past. That is the answer. And
I had a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Like what like other than sitting in what the feeling, like if it's the cigarette or the cake or TV or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
like, what if there's something else, like you're using that to feed something in you, but it really, like you should more like swap it with something else, or like you're using the cake or the TV because you're procrastinating, or like maybe you should go for a walk, or like, I don't know, swap the idea of what you think you need with something else that actually like is serving you.
So I don't understand the question. The question is, how do you find out what that is?
Yeah.
That'll be something that will come to you. Like I couldn't answer that for you.
Right. But that's more, is that a possibility that it's like, rather than just sitting in the feeling of wanting the cake and like pushing through that feeling, figuring out maybe like why do I think I need this? Maybe there's something else I actually truly need.
Right. And I think, it's to some degree, trying to find answers in that way doesn't necessarily, you wouldn't necessarily get an answer immediately, because right now it's more, when you're doing things as a response to just discomfort,
Mm-hmm.
it's just that there is some unresolved, for the lack of a better word, energy, which you have not, digested. So it's just, most of those actions are just responses to that, to those triggers. And what we want to do is to start to just like dissolve those triggers. And once that dissolution starts to happen, then these other ideas that you're talking about, maybe like intuition starts to function. You'll start to do things intuitively rather than from like a recipe.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what I meant more. You said it better.
Right. So that's what we want to do. So don't worry. So the intuitive, we are all intuitive. Like if you look at kids, like they are very, very intelligent, intuitive, because their mind is very clean. Like they haven't absorbed a bunch of stuff, right? Like their mind is very young and fresh. And as we grow older, our sense of intuition starts to fade, because especially in the modern education, like you're just presented ideas and say, this is how it is, rather than like, this deep sense of intuition expressing itself. So as you start to undo all of that sort of ideas that you've absorbed, this deep sense of intuition will naturally start to function, because that's really how we tend to operate. Um, um, but yeah, that's a good question. It's going to happen naturally. You don't have to worry about it. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Let's get on to the book. Let me share my screen. Cool. Can everybody see the screen? Oops. Okay. Cool. So would anyone like to do the Sanskrit or English today? Maybe have somebody different. I would love to hear somebody else's voice. No volunteers. Crickets here.
I'll do the English.
Okay. Okay, and I can do the Sanskrit. So verse 19. Vyapritesh va indreshvatma vyapari va vivekinam drishyate abhreshu dhatvastu Thavaniva yathashashi.
The
In
moon,
English?
the moon appears to be running when the clouds move in the sky. Likewise, to the non-discriminating person, the Atman appears to be active when it is observed through the functions of the sense organs.
Okay, so here in this verse, we're given this image. So I love like these verses because they're all giving you like an image. Like, you know, you can imagine that there's a moon in the sky, and you know, sometimes like clouds are moving, but it appears like the moon is moving, right? So there's this sort of illusion that we are experiencing when that's happening. And maybe that's not like, you know, that's not that's like a very ancient example, but a more modern example is like when you're sitting in a train and you know, and you're in a station, and then there's another train which passes by, but your train is stationary, but it appears that your train is moving even though the other train is actually moving, right? So these are these sort of day-to-day optical illusions that we experience. And what this is alluding to is this fact that we are attributing properties of something else to something else. So you're attributing properties of the movement to this other thing, but in fact, you are moving, right? Or the opposite, which is like when the other thing is moving, uh, we think that we are moving. So, uh, so in this case, the Atman is the thing that is still all the time. So your the self, which is just witnessing everything, is always still. There's no movement in that. So if you think of like, you know, the analogy is space. In space, all of these things exist, but space is absolutely still, right? So inside space, there's like movement. You know, the bodies are moving, physical objects are moving, thoughts are moving, emotions are moving. They're all moving, but there's something which is the context in which this movement happens, right? And that is always still. But in our ignorance, we attribute to the uh, uh, we think that whatever is moving, we are that. So here it says, to the non-discriminating person, the Atman appears to be active. So actually the Atman is still, but the objects are moving. But because of this, you know, superimposition, where we attribute to the Atman properties of what is seen. So, you know, we are seeing thoughts, we are seeing emotions, we are seeing physical objects, and they are moving in our experience, right? Everything that is physical is a movement in some way, which is it appears for some time, it exists, and it goes away, right? So to this movement that we see, we attribute that movement, the properties of the physical, to the Atman, which is I am, you know, in this case. So if, you know, if it's an emotion, I am angry or I am joyful, Like those are movements that you're experiencing. Like, joy is like a movement of energy, or like, extreme happiness is a movement of energy. Extreme sadness is a movement of energy. Those are all movements that you're seeing. And in the ignorance, we say, I am happy, or I am sad. So that's the idea here. And because we observe things through our senses, we think we are what we see. And that's this ignorance. But there's always a subject, and there's always objects, and you're always the subject experiencing this entire world of phenomena. Doesn't mean that whatever you're experiencing doesn't have a lot of power and energy to make you feel certain emotions, but you're always the subject. There is something that is still, that doesn't move. Is the word is theta in Sanskrit, just absolutely still, like an anvil, like a mountain that's just there. And on top of that, all these experiences are. So, there's this space of emptiness where there's nothing, which is still. And in that stillness are these objects moving, and they're passing by you. And sometimes we tend to hug those objects a lot because we really like them, or we tend to like really run away from those objects. But that's basically what is going on. Objects are appearing, they exist for a while, and then they're gone. But to those objects, we think we attach sense of identity to them. And that's the verse here alluding to that. When we observe it through the senses, we think we are those objects. Any questions about this verse? We're going to get more into this idea. Okay, let's do the next verse. Okay. Oh no. Atma chaitanyamaschitya tehendriyam manodhiyah swakriyartheshu vartante surya lokam yatha janaha.
Depending upon the Atman, which is of the nature of consciousness, the body, senses, mind, and intellect engage themselves in their respective activities, just as men work depending upon the light of the sun.
Cool. So here again, we are given this idea that the Atman is separate from whatever that whatever that is our experience, which is, we have a sense of body, we have senses, which is giving us information, we have minds that is, feeling emotions, we have intellects that's like allowing us to solve problems. They are all doing things, and they all have their respective tasks. Right? Like the body is constantly like assimilating and digesting food and like doing all of the stuff. Senses are like giving us information about this world. The mind is, feeling emotions, and, this emotional aspect, which is very important. And then there's this intellectual aspect, which is also very important if you want to solve problems. So all of them have like their responsibilities in our, in the way we experience this world. But the Atman is separate from all of it. It is like the sun shining on, on all the trees, and because of the energies of the sun, like the trees grow. Bacteria need energy from the sun. So everything, in fact, is nothing but like the energy of the sun being used and transforming life, right? So that's sort of the analogy here, which is the without the sun, everything else would not work. Like you can't have a plant without having the sun. So the sun is the plant is a consequence of the sun. So just like that, the mind is actually a consequence of the Atman. Without the Atman, there would be no mind, and no body, no intellect. Because what happens when you die? Your body essentially doesn't have the touch of the Atman. It's gone, right? Which is why it's like no longer the body. But the body is still separate. Like only the body dies, right? There's like the Atman still remains. So that's kind of where we want to start to see, where there's always this sense of separation. The body is just something that is a tool. It's like having a car, right? Like if your car gets destroyed, you are still there. The car is just something that you have, like an accumulation. And the way I like to frame, like it's a nice way to frame it is like whatever is an accumulation cannot be you, right? Like the way we even like use it in language is like, I can say I have, you know, a house, I have a book, or like I have a cup with me, but you can never say I am the cup, because that's the language itself is expressing it in a way that it is not me. It is definitely a part of me, right? Like I have a body, I have feelings, but they cannot be me because I am always seeing those things. And the problem becomes when we start to identify and we start to think that we are those feelings, and then we get, you know, we move along with the feelings. So if I'm feeling a certain way, then I will think I am somehow that feeling, and that's where the craziness starts to happen. So if we can clearly see that we are separate from whatever we are perceiving, then there's no problem at all times, because you know, things are going to function. There's this great intelligence in everything, right? Look, if you look at this world, it's not just this planet, but this entire universe. There's this deep intelligence operating in making sure this world is what it is. And that deep intelligence will start to function through you, because you are part of that deep intelligence. The same life that is in you is the same life that is functioning across every single thing. There's no difference. And once you start to see that, your limited mind, where you think, you know, you have a certain idea about how things should be, that will start to drop. Because, you know, what is your mind is also just a bunch of experiences that you've gathered in this life, and you think that that is somehow better than so this infinite amount of information that exists in this universe. Whatever you do in this world is going to be a drop compared to what is in this entire universe. So we need to stop living from this sort of mental space and start to live from this place of the Atman, which is, you know, you are this divine spark, and due to this divine spark, everything else functions. And once this divine spark is not, then everything else drops as well. So you know, the mind will continue to do what it needs to do. The body will continue to do what the body needs to do. Everything will continue, because in fact, there is no real control in that way. Like things are just happening. Like it's the property of the body to just to digest food, to assimilate things. Like there's no real control, right? There's this sort of sense of this feeling that we do have control, but actually, if you analyze it, there's not much real control, and that's what we're going to start to see. Cool. Any questions?
Hey, Puneet. Karthik.
Hey, Karthik.
Hey, any light on the nature of consciousness as against Atman as just consciousness? You know?
You're perfectly right on track. If you look at the next verse, it's going to talk about that.
Okay, cool.
So you're thinking about it in the right way. And it's pretty awesome that this, like all of these books have been, it's a process, right? It's taking you on a journey. So it's like, it's sort of the natural consequences to start to ask these questions of like, what is the nature of the Atman? A really good question. We're going to answer it in the next verse. Okay, next verse. Verse 21. Dehendriya gunan karman yamale satchidatmani adhyasyanta vivekena ganane nilatadivat.
Fools, because they lack in their powers of discrimination, superimpose on the self of the nature of absolute existence knowledge all the varied functions of the body and the senses, just as they attribute blue color and the like to the sky.
So this is a harsh word he has used, fools. But I think fool here just means somebody who just is ignorant. So, you know, because of this lack of ignorance, and this discrimination. So this discrimination here is, you know, what is true and what is false. So the Sanskrit word for discrimination is viveka, which is one of the wings of this work. One wing is discrimination, and then the other wing is this dispassion, which I think we touched upon earlier. So, but this discrimination of what is true and what is not true, what is the real and what is the unreal. So, in the case of the snake in the rope, the snake is real. The snake is unreal. The rope is real. So the constant discrimination that I am the subject and whatever I perceive is an object. So whenever you get identified with anything, there is this lack of discrimination happening where you're believing in what you're seeing. So again, so that's a great opportunity to like practice this subject-object discrimination. So whenever you feel triggered, I am the subject. I am not what I'm perceiving. So you're sort of dropping this belief in what you're seeing. Maybe I think it's a good time to touch upon this thing called the KKK, the Sanskrit KKK, as my teacher calls it. So the first K is kama, which means desire, right? So like I desire X. And because of that desire, there's the next K, which is karma. I do a bunch of action to kind of fulfill that desire, to acquire the desire, to maybe buy the desire, whatever it is. And then either the desire is going to come true or it's not going to come true. And we're going to take the case of when it doesn't come true, because that's when most of our problems are. And so because of the thwarted desire, we're going to get the third K, which is krodha, which is anger. And that's basically this our entire experience of suffering, which is I have a desire, I do some action to fulfill the desire, and the action doesn't quite work, and then there's anger of like, why didn't this work? So what we are going to try to do instead is that whenever this desire comes, we're going to try to like drop the desire itself. And this may seem as like, this lack of engagement in certain things. But in the beginning, I think it's a very good practice to kind of get a little control of our compulsive nature of our mind. So, our mind has a lot of compulsiveness where we want to like do things. It's just like, oh, I want X, I just want to get it. Like there's no sense of like, doing it out of a place of sattva, when we talked about the three gunas. We want to get to a place where we want to do things from a place of sattva, which is just like, oh, okay, I want to try that thing. And, rather than like, oh, I really want X. And here desire is that sort of craving quality to the desire. There's nothing wrong in desire per se, but whenever you have sort of this cravingness, we want to like try to look at that. And in the beginning, it would be helpful to start to see if you can drop the entire desire itself. And what that's going to, so you can drop any of the Ks, kama, karma, and krodha. There's nothing wrong. So you can drop the first thing, which is, right when the desire comes, you can say, okay, actually, I don't want it. But that may not always happen because the desire may be too strong. And then you do the second action, which is karma. Now, when you're doing the karma, like I mentioned, be extremely conscious of what you're doing and why you're doing it, right? So you can be extremely conscious and go through the desire. And sometimes if you do it consciously, sometimes it may be more effective because now you're actually doing it with full focus. So you may actually end up getting it, the probability of it being fulfilled is a lot higher when you're actually conscious and extremely focused on the task because you're engaged in doing the desire. And then if it comes true, plus this, why are you feeling blissed out? Because of the self, not because of the object. So that is sort of the, you're being absolutely conscious of what's going on. The second case, when it doesn't work, then we move on to the anger. Oh my God, I'm so pissed off. Why didn't it work? Now in that moment, again, be absolutely conscious. What's going on? I am angry because I gave this object in the past joy-producing properties. And the joy is, it's not that joy isn't there. It's just that my mind is now covered in like this energy of anger, and the bliss of the self is not available. All I have to do is drop the anger. And that may not be very easy to do either, but just see what is going on. Once you start to get conscious about what is happening, it's going to, like, the mechanism of the mind starts to become extremely repetitive, because it is absolutely repetitive. It's just that we haven't spent some time to see what the hell is going on. Once you start to see that, it's going to become very easy to play with it. And you'll see that the mind is actually very flexible. It's a tool. You are the king of your mind and the queen of the mind. The mind is not, right now it feels the other way, where the mind, it's like, trying to control the mind is like trying to control the wind. But, with practice, it's going to get a little easier. So we need to develop this power of discrimination. So because of the lack of discrimination, we superimpose on the self the nature. So this is answering Karthik's question. So the nature of the self is absolute, which means that it never changes. Existence, consciousness, existence and knowledge, which means, so if you ever think about, like, how do I have the faculty of knowing things, right? Like, I'm aware of things. Like, what is that faculty? Where does it come from? Is it a quality of the mind? Is it the quality of something of the intellect? Right? Like, so that's a good question. So you'll start to notice that, the mind sometimes is not available sometimes, but I still know things. Like for example, in a typical example in this work is like in deep sleep. Like there's nothing available to perceive because it's completely blank. But when you wake up the next day, you can say that I had a deep sleep. And you can only say that is because you can remember through reflection, through memory of an experience. You can say, oh, I slept really well because I feel very refreshed. But while you're experiencing it, the mind was not available to experience that deep sleep and to say, oh, this is deep sleep. So the mind still is actually covered. It's like in the seed form. So if you think of, like, how do I know I exist? Like, do you have to, like, does somebody have to tell you that I exist, that you exist, right? Like, it's just, so even if somebody, like, there's some Buddhist philosophies that say, the self doesn't exist. Like, the self is, I don't exist. But even to say I don't exist, you need to know that you don't exist. So there's always something that knows whatever you are saying. So even the fact that you don't exist is known by you. Right? So if you say I am really miserable, I am really happy, there's always this sense of knowing. Like, I know that X is in my experience. Like, I know happiness is in front of me, I know sadness is in front of me. So there's always a sense of knowing, and in that knowing we attribute the quality of what is being known and say I am that. So there is this sense of I am. Like, we go one level closer, where there is I amness and I knownness, right? So there's I am X and I know X. Always, all the time. I know this, I know that, I am this, I am that. But even before we put our attention on the object, there is an I am and then there is an I know. So the quality of the self is that it gives you the ability to exist, that I am. So that is the nature of the self. Like, it is, and it has the quality of knowledge, which is like I know, and it gives you. So it's the consequence of the self is that you can say I am. The consequence of the self is that you can say I know. So it's this the analogy. A nice analogy is like you're in a theater, and there's a projector, and the projector has a bulb. The bulb is shining a light through a film, and the film is projecting images on a screen, right? So that's kind of like our experience of this world, where there is this self, which is the light that's shining, and because of this light shining and falling on this film, which is our bundle of memories, our bundle of experiences, our bundle of it's like wearing colored glasses, and because of that bundle, there is images which is being projected. So when I see my mom, I feel extremely happy, like, oh, that's my mom. But if somebody random sees my mom, they're not going to feel the exact same emotion, because their bundle is giving them different information. For me, it's telling me it's my mom, but for somebody else, it's saying woman, right? So it's like that bundle paints my world and gives me my subjective experience of this world. But there is a light, and without the light, there would be no images on the screen. So the light is the cause for images to appear. Without the light, no images. So you are the light, which is, the quality of being able to, I guess, know things, being able to, the fact that you say I exist. Those are the qualities of the self. And all the qualities of the limited qualities of, like, color and like all of that are to your bundle of thoughts and impressions and vasanas. Those are the qualities, and they're external to the self. Does that answer your question, Karthik?
Hey, it kind of does. I think I'll just have to think a little more about it.
So was there a specific direction you wanted the question to sort of go to?
No, not particularly. I just, I mean, we are creating attributes for, or sort of assigning, sort of, qualifying what the Atman was, I guess, in a way, in the previous verse, by saying that, there's a quality, or, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about, I'm going back to the previous verse for a second in my book.
Verse
I don't
20,
know, I
right?
just, the quality, I mean, the attributes that you're assigning to Atman, I'm just not able to.
Okay, I mean, I understand. So, like, don't worry about it. This is just giving you an introduction to say this is an idea. You don't have to believe it.
Okay.
This idea will come around again.
I think I perfectly understand what you were talking about. I just don't know if it completely answered my question. I just think it's a function of thinking more about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Let's move to
Puneet, if you
Yes.
remember a couple of classes back, I think I had the same question for you where I said, what are the intrinsic properties of the self? And your answer at that time was Satchitanand, which is existence, consciousness, and bliss. So would that be the answer to Karthik's question right now? Because I think that is what he's grappling with as well. Like, what are the inherent properties of the self?
Right. Yeah. So here we are only given two of them, which is Satchit. And Ananda is like the third one, which essentially means bliss. And the reason why we don't talk about bliss right now is because our experience doesn't say it is bliss. Right? Right? Our experience is like, I am actually quite like not really experiencing bliss. So let's not like talk about something we don't experience just yet. But we definitely experience, I know, I am, right? Like those are experiences that we can say is true for us today and right now. Like, that you are in class, you're listening to this voice, I am feeling a certain way. Like those are direct experiences that you're having right now. But you're right. Satchit Ananda is how we define the nature of the self in this work. But let's like stick to what the book is talking about, so that we are not going to the bliss just yet. But thanks for sharing that, Soumya. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts and questions? Okay, let's do 22. All right. I like this verse. Agyan nanam anasopadhehe kritvatvadini chatmani kalpayante ambugate chandre chalanadi yatha mambhasaha.
Due to ignorance, the tremblings that belong to the water are attributed to the reflected moon dancing on it. Likewise, the agency of actions and so on are delusively understood as the nature of the self or Atman.
Cool. So here we're given another image, which is so this book was written like back in like the like sometime around like 800 CE, and during the time you can imagine. So Adi Shankara used to live in the southern part of India, someplace in Kerala, and you can imagine in a evening he's teaching this class, and like back in the day, I'm guessing they didn't have like places to store water, so there are these like pots of water which have like water in them. There's like many pots, and it's like a beautiful evening, because it gets pretty hot in India, so people tend to do things in the evening. So you can imagine it's like evening and the moon is shining. Let's say it's a full moon, and now the image of the moon is now being reflected on the water in these pots, and on these pots, each of these pots now have an image of the moon, because each of them is sort of like a mirror, right? Now you can look at these pots of water, and like maybe some pots, like you can, like they're shaking or whatever, and you can see that the image of the moon is also shaking. So now you can look at the image and say, wow, the image of the moon is, shaking and it's trembling. And I can poke the water, and the the image completely gets distorted, and I can think, oh my God, the moon is distorted, right? But what is happening is just that the images are dancing and they're trembling. All of whatever is appearing is the reflection, and it's not really really the moon. The moon is out there shining, or like reflecting in the case technically, but the moon is there. And nothing is happening to the moon. So I throw a rock into the water, and the water kind of like, there's a ripple. All of that is to the reflection. The moon doesn't change at all. Another example is, when you go to like one of those like fun house places with like different mirrors, and you see a reflection of yourself, which is like really short or like really tall, really thin, really fat. And you can like look at them and you can laugh, right? Because for a fact it's not you. It's just a reflection. But let's say you start to believe in that image and say, oh my God, I am become like, like a like really this like, like my face is all weird, right? You can believe in that image, and that is the ignorance there, right? Like somebody can come up to you and be like, hey, that is not you, that's an image. So don't worry about that. So that's kind of the same understanding, which is due to the attributes of the image, we feel trembling. So like here, we get like if we are agitated, for example, like I am trembling because of something, we identify with the trembling, but you are not trembling, right? Like, so trembling is passing through you, like you are seeing trembling happening, but you are untouched. The Atman is shining on the trembling, just like the moon is untouched, or like the reflection of the sun on so the sun is shining, and it doesn't change at all. So that's kind of the analogy that's being alluded to here. Does that make sense? So the superimposition. So we are constantly superimposing the qualities of the reflection. We are superimposing on us. So if we see a reflection of, I am extremely joyful, that is not the property of this. That is not the quality of you. Something is joyful. The mind is joyful. The mind is upset. The mind is miserable. The mind is fearful. The mind is angry. All of those are qualities of the mind, and it's a reflection because the self is shining on them. So the self has no sense of agency in that way. The self is just like shining. It does nothing. It's the mind which is like moving. The mind has a thought that I want to do X. It's the mind has a thought that I want to do Y. But the self shines without any sense of like preference. It shines on everything equally, and because of our vasanas, it shines on one thing, and then it illumines something like, oh, I let's say, what's a good example? Stock market crashes. Now that's information that has come into your awareness. Now, because of that impression that stock market is important to you, or like it relates to your bank account or whatever, now there's a feeling of like, I am somehow like, let's say a consequence to that information is, I am going to somehow not be okay, right? Because there's a deep association to that. And now you're believing in that story, and now that thought can trigger a bunch of other thoughts. And now you're locked down in this, in this rabbit hole of thinking about yourself. But the source of it was this root thought that I am not going to be okay in that case. And that has just been illuminated in your awareness. Just like any other thought, just like, a thought like, oh, this is a nice looking tree. That could be one thought. That has no power over you because you have not given it any importance. But a thought like the stock market just crashed 50% is a very powerful thought because you have given it extreme importance. So just start to see that that's what is going on, which is thoughts are being illumined, but I somehow, in my ignorance, in my experience in this world, I have given certain thoughts a lot more energy and a lot more joy producing or misery producing properties. And because of that energy, I will flow with that thought rather than just see that thought pass by me. But the relationship is always the same for every thought. It's just that some thoughts are more appealing to us than others because of our past experiences. Cool, does that make sense? I think the next verse also talks about the same idea. But we are going to get into this. This is getting really exciting. Yes. Okay, no questions? Let's move on to the next verse. Rage cha sukha dukkhadi buddhau satyam pravartate sushuptau nasti tannasho tasmad buddhestu natmanaha.
Attachment, desire, pleasure, pain, and so on are perceived to exist only as long as the intellect or mind functions. They are not perceived in deep sleep when the mind ceases to exist. Therefore, they belong to the mind alone and not the Atman.
Okay, so here we are given this idea that in order to suffer, we need the mind. Without the mind, there is no suffering. So all of our attachments and pleasures and pains and desires, which are basically the vasanas that hold our sense of identity in place, that is all in the mind. And we get a clear example of when we are in deep sleep, our entire problems of this world disappear. When we are experiencing deep sleep, only when we wake up, you're just like, oh shit, now all of those things are back, right? So when you're really suffering, why do we tend to sleep a lot? Because sleep feels good. Why does sleep feel good? Because when you're sleeping, the mind is not available. So you can clearly see that the mind is the storehouse of all of our suffering. Without the mind, we are quite okay. So now the question arises, is it possible to not have a mind when you're awake? And that's a good question. And the answer to that is yes. And that's the work that we're doing, which is the mind is essentially an event. It's not some external thing that exists. We are constantly producing the mind all the time. It's kind of like the example is it's a candle. So we look at a candle and there's a flame. The flame is not an external thing. It's constantly being created, right? It's like, because the candle exists, it's in every moment there is like this process of like combustion happening continuously. The moment the fuel runs out, the flame is gone, right? So there has to be fuel for the flame. Similarly, there has to be fuel for the mind. And what is our fuel of the mind? Fuel of the mind is vasana, and and these like egoistic impressions. So all of our yoga and the process of this work is destroying and eliminating the fuel. How do we accelerate combustion of the fuel, and how do we stop creating new fuel? Because fuel is the reason that holds this mind in place. And we're going to see that is it possible to completely burn up this fuel? And what are some of the tools that we can use to accelerate that process? And how do we not create more fuel? Because every time you engage in this world unconsciously, you are creating more fuel. And as you start to get more conscious, you're going to start to burn fuel, because you'll start to see that the bliss, what we are seeking, is the state of not having a mind. In all the moments that we have been joyful, in all the moments that we have had, that we are feeling like blissful, is because the mind was not there. And perfect personal example is a deep sleep, which is in deep. Everyone loves a good sleep, right? Like nobody hates a good sleep. Why does everyone love a good sleep? Because there is no mind available for suffering. So that's the idea that we're getting in this verse. Okay. Any questions about this? Okay, let's do one more verse and then we can start. Okay, verse 24. Prakashor akarasya toyasya shaityam agnerya thoshana swabhavaha satchitananda nitya nirmala atmanaha.
Just as luminosity is the nature of the sun, coolness is that of water, and heat is that of fire, so too the nature of the Atman is eternity, purity, existence, consciousness, and bliss.
Yay, we get introduced to bliss now. Okay. So Soumya and Karthik, this is Satchitananda was what Soumya was talking about earlier. And we get that in this verse, which is, it is existence, consciousness, and bliss. And why do we say it is bliss? Because all of our endeavor in life is, we have this endeavor to be happy, quotes, be happy, which is what? Which is being content, being satisfied, being, if you think of all the desires that you have, and if you think of, if I were to have satisfied those desires, how would I feel? Whatever, let's say you had, some genie comes up to you and says, I will fulfill every wish that you have. How would you feel when all of those wishes are fulfilled? What would you want? Right? It's like, so what this, if you can see that all of our experiences happen from within, right? Whatever you're experiencing, they happen within. There's even like what you're seeing is actually happening in your mind, right? Like there's, things are being reflected and your brain is analyzing them, and that is producing an experience from in your mind. So we will start to see in this work that as your mind gets quieter and quieter, whenever your mind is absolutely quiet, the bliss of the self shines through. And all we are seeking is that. Any project that you're thinking about, and when that comes true, your mind becomes quiet and the bliss of the self reveals itself. When you're, miserable, your mind is cloudy, the bliss of the self is hidden. And when you try to, you have a desire and that desire is thwarted and you're angry about it, and now you're suffering because now this, you don't have what you want. You put in extra effort, you struggle for like, let's say X amount of time, and now you get this desire, and this now what's happened? That your mind is now no longer cloudy because that desire has been fulfilled. So, so the bliss of the self is shining through again. So the mind is the one that's holding everything from you. The bliss of the self is available all the time. So I like the analogy that we hear in this work is that if you're sitting, you're really thirsty, and you're trying to dig the ground for water and saying, I'm really thirsty, I'm going to dig the ground for water, not realizing that there's an entire river flowing right behind you. All you have to do is look, and drink how much ever water that you want. But we want to do the work. We want to dig. And another interesting example is like, what my teacher shares is like, you have a hammer with you and you're hitting yourself in the head constantly hitting yourself, like hammering your head, and it's hurting. And then somebody comes up to you and be like, what are you doing? Why are you constantly hitting yourself? And you say, because it feels so good when I stop. So, why don't you just stop hitting yourself? And that's what is happening. We are struggling, we are doing certain actions, we get the action, so a desire and object of desire come together, and for a moment, we stop hitting ourselves. And now for a moment, and that gets a little boring, we start hitting ourselves again. I need X, I need Y, I need to do this, I don't need to that, blah, 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 blah. And then something happens, and then you stop hitting yourself, and you keep hitting yourself. So we want to drop this entire psychological process of like abandon hitting yourself, because the bliss is there all the time. And that is the nature of the self. It is consciousness, existence, and bliss. Okay, it's 9:13 here, so I think this is a good place to stop for today. Wow, we did a bunch of really awesome verses today. Any questions? Okay. All right, let's do a meditation. Stop sharing my screen. All right, so everyone try and sit up straight if you can, if you've not been sitting up straight. Maybe if you're feeling sleepy, you can leave your eyes open, but if you're not, then I would recommend closing your eyes. And just start by taking a few deep breaths, consciously breathing. Just release the energy. And just relax into the breath when you're exhaling. Take another long breath. Try to relax more if you can. Settle a little deeper. See if you can notice that the breath is an object in your awareness. Can't you feel the breath? You notice it's happening. So it's not you. Certainly an experience. So in this work, we are to do this discrimination, this subject-object discrimination. We want to see that there is always this relationship, that you are the subject and all your experiences are object. So we want to, in our meditation, it's always useful to maybe in the beginning to be visual. So you can imagine yourself to sit on this bank of a river, or if you're lying down and looking at the sky. And just see that the thoughts that go by are just like the clouds going by in the sky. or the water flowing in the river. And some thoughts have no energy, but some thoughts do have a lot of energy. I just want to start to see that. And you can even see that energy is a object in your awareness. So if you think of some painful memory that brings up some energy, can't you see that energy also appears just like the breath? You just want to stay with that sense of being a witness. And even if the energy is strong, we just want to try and just notice the energy without giving that energy more power over us and taking us away from being the witness. You just want to sit back and notice that the energy also is appearing. It exists for a while and it dissipates eventually. It may take some time. But we want to keep practicing this subject-object discrimination. It may help to even name what you're seeing. So if it's emotion, you can name the emotion. That gives you a little amount of space or gap to not flow with that emotion. And you'll start to notice like there is a certain pattern. There are certain vasanas that tend to make our mind think of certain things more than something else. And we want to start to become conscious of that. Maybe helpful to even maintain a journal where you write about some patterns that you see, or you don't even have to think about the pattern just yet, but when you go back, you can see the pattern. But we want to get as conscious to see what is going on. And when your mind may get a little quiet, try to see if you can notice the noticer. You can try to introvert your attention to itself. Try to see what is it that is seeing all of this. What is the nature of this witness? See if you can sense this feeling of empty space, like a sky, the space in which all these thoughts appear and disappear, and then they appear again. If you notice that you've been lost in thought, that's totally fine. Bring the attention back to the subject. Remind yourself that you're the subject all the time. And whatever you're perceiving is just stuff from the past coming up again. There's no special, nothing special about anything that you're perceiving, really. It's just your recollection of stuff, which may or may not be even accurate. Keep bringing your attention back to the witness. Practice the subject-object discrimination. When you do that, when you notice that you're the witness, the attention to the stuff is just dropped for a moment. That allows you to disengage with that flow of thought. So you want to keep doing that so our mind gets rewired, gives control back to the self. So there's this practice of self-inquiry where you ask yourself the question, who am I? And you don't just do that as, like asking yourself a question, but it's this through the subject-object discrimination. So whenever you see yourself engaged in a thought and you recognize that you've been engaged, at that moment, you can ask yourself, who am I? And just notice and see that you are the subject looking at this, looking at stuff, looking at these thoughts. And then you're building this deep impression that you are the subject, that you are the self. The mind is getting more and more familiar. So that's a nice way to remember, just to ask yourself, who am I, when you're lost in these, in a thought which has a lot of energy. Just a question, who am I? You're not what you're seeing. You are the self. Just free from, just always shining, untouched, does not change. Because of which you can perceive, because of which you know. It is existence itself. It's consciousness. Slowly start to bring your attention back to objective reality. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. So let's end by our doing one chant again. So let's do the first chant that we did in the beginning of the course. Cool. So feel free to join me, or you can choose not to. That's fine too. So this is a verse from the Bhaja Govindam. It's a beautiful verse, one of my favorite verses, and it gives you an understanding of why we even pursue this work. And I'll show you the English translation after, but it's beautiful. Good verse to ponder over. So here goes. Yogarato va bhogarato va Yogarato va bhogarato va Sangarato va Sangavihina Sangarato va Sangavihina Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chitta Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chitta Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva. So here is the English.
What's bhoga again?
It's a good question. So bhoga is the way we live life, where we think there's, I guess, in terms of like consumption, the American way, I would say, American way of living, which is thinking that, you know, having the most amount of stuff is what's going to make you happy. And that's fine too, if you want to live that way. But unless you know the secret to where is happiness, only then can you actually enjoy the things that you have. Because even you may have a bunch of things in this world and you may still be miserable because you don't know how to enjoy. And that's what we're learning. How do we really enjoy this world? And you can only enjoy when your mind revels in the self. And what does that mean? When your mind rests in that vast emptiness of yourself. And there is absolute bliss there. And that's what we're trying to see with this work. So one thing that I did say in the meditation was maintaining a journal. And I think that's, you know, I haven't personally done it a lot, but I know people who have and have gotten a lot of value from it. That allows you to, you know, have a record in a way of things that are coming up for you. And that's been helpful to, you know, go back and see, and then you can actually also see how your mind has progressed in the time that you've been doing this work, because then you can see, oh wow, I was attached to this thing like a few months ago, but now it's no longer an issue, and you can do some sort of reflection in that way. So that's like a nice tool as well to write. If some people like writing, some people don't, so if you do, that's a nice way to do that too. But keep, so the subject-object discrimination is not something that you only do in meditation. Take it out to the world. Whenever you feel extremely blissed out, practice it then. When you feel extremely miserable, practice it then too. And you will notice that the subject never changes. Whatever is going on, I mean, don't believe me. Don't, you know, this is a theory, or this is a hypothesis, an idea. See if that is true for you. When you're extremely blissed out, notice yourself, notice the mind, or notice the subject, and see, has that changed? Yeah, the only problem is like remembering that you need to do this. That's the hard part, because when you're flowing with the energy of whatever is going on, it becomes very hard to remember to apply this. So that's why it's really, really important to have a meditation practice, so that, you know, mind is sort of, at least, you know, for a few moments in the day, you're consciously remembering to do this, and you're forming this impression, which you can take to your day-to-day outside. So that's the importance of meditation, where you are building this deep practice, and that practice is going to help you when you go out in your day-to-day, because in those moments is where things start to show up, and in those moments is when we have to practice, so that we don't build more. We are not adding more firewood to our pile of things that we have to burn. We want to destroy, or at least not add stuff. In the beginning, it's okay to not keep adding stuff, which is staying conscious and staying aware of what is going on. And then if in the real world you can practice subject-object discrimination a lot more, then you'll start to see that this fire starts to burn in your day-to-day too, and not just in your meditation. Right now, in the meditation is when we are trying to destroy certain ideas. You know, when you're meditating in your own day, some idea will come up which will have a lot of energy, and then if you can just stay with that energy and not, you know, try to run from it or try to suppress it, you will see that that energy fades away. So what you're doing in your meditation practice is burning up this fire. And then if you can do this in your day-to-day, then your entire day becomes all about burning fire. And then you are not going to run away from things that trigger you. In fact, you'll start to see that once you know how to deal with triggers, then triggers become fun, right? It's almost like I want to burn stuff because I know this is a trigger. That's the only thing that's holding me back from the bliss of the self shining all the time, is this sort of bundle of these ideas in the form of vasanas. So that's what we have to burn. And if you can take this practice and do it all the time, every day, and not just in 20 minutes during meditation or once a week or whatever, you want to be able to do this all the time. And once you have burnt all of it, and once you know the tools of how not to accumulate more, then you're free. Right? So the only practice you have to do is get to the point where you know how to not accumulate more stuff and burn all the existing stuff, because there is a limited amount. There is a limited amount. And there is an end to the process where you don't have to practice anymore. It becomes a living reality for you. So that is the promise. But don't believe me. Just like, it's only an idea that I'm presenting to you. See if it is true in your own experience. See if you live life like a bhogi, like bhoga. So it's an interesting word, bhoga. So yoga and yogi. So there are just two words. So a yogi is a person who practices yoga, right? So like when you go to a yoga class or whatever, everyone says, "Oh, welcome yogis." What does that mean? It's a person who is like practicing yoga. A bhogi, which is a person who practices bhoga, which is, unconsciously reveling in the, enjoying objects in the world. Unconsciously. There's nothing wrong in enjoying objects in the world. The problem is only when you're unconscious about it. Because when you're unconscious about it, you will think that the objects have joy-producing properties or misery-producing properties. And then you're building more vasana. So all you have to do is get conscious. Whatever you do in this world, become conscious. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And then you will start to burn, or at least in that moment, you will stop accumulating vasana, because when you're enjoying that object, you will know that the object really doesn't have joy-producing properties. So that object will no longer be a vasana for you. It will just be an impression. But if you are unconscious about it, it's very easy to fall into the trap and think that I need that object, because without that object, I cannot live. So that's the kind of things we want to stop avoiding, which is why I think, some yoga traditions like Tantra, for example, they are much harder in my experience to do, because they say, it's all about trying to manifest things and trying to fix your world, which is like, do the things that you, or like get the things that you desire. The Tantra is all about like trying to dream shape in a way, to try to like make things happen. And that's that's eventually the consequence of doing this work, where you'll become more efficient in your day-to-day. So things that you really want will start to happen for you, because you know how this world works and you know how your own mind works. So you start to get better at the things you do. But Tantra is like another sort of way of engaging this work, which is, go and do stuff in this world and like, try to experience as many things as you can, and try to manifest things and try to propitiate these like deities that you can do to like get the things that you want. But if all of that is done from this motivation that getting what you want is going to make you happy, then you are building more vasana there as well. So we have to be very careful in those moments as well, which is, am I trying to propitiate these gods because I think the outcome is where the joy is? Then the relationship is exactly the same. Nothing has changed. It's just like, instead of now propitiating cake, you're propitiating some goddess, right? Like the object has changed, but your motivation is now the same. So it's which is why, like, in the beginning, it's better to not engage, to reduce the number of desires that you have, because there's definitely bliss in getting what you want, right? That is our experience. And that is true for all of us, that whenever we get something, we feel really happy. But that can get confusing, because then you start, if you don't have the understanding that the bliss comes from within and not from the object, then you will start to just get, again, lost in this world of objects. Which is why I feel like this, in the beginning, reducing the amount of desires and just focusing on like undoing the crazy ideas and fixing some of the vasanas that you have and just dealing with that is much more useful. Once you have that stability, then you can pursue whatever you want. But until then, there's this deep belief that whatever you're pursuing is actually where the bliss is. But until that breaks, which is what this work is going to give you, it breaks the firm belief in our mind that the world has joy-producing properties. The world absolutely has no joy-producing properties or misery-producing properties. It's all here, right? It's all here. And if we have that deep understanding here, then we are going to be able to do stuff in this world, but do it from a sense of unentanglement or you'll still be doing a bunch of things. It's just that you're not going to get entangled with it. And when they happen, and if they're successful, you're going to feel blissful. If they are not, if they don't work out, it's fine too, because there was no entanglement with that. So that's all I wanted to say. Any thoughts or questions? Great work, everybody. You have survived. I was just like saying in the beginning of class, this is the 5th class. So that means we've been together for 28 days now, almost a month, which is, a long time. And this work does take time, in the sense, in the beginning, it takes time. If you have a consistent practice in the beginning, it's kind of like, the graph of like the benefit that you see is like, you see a really slow thing, but then it just like exponentially rises towards the end. Once you clearly know the practice of not accumulating more stuff and just like burning stuff, like once you understand those two things, then life becomes it becomes play, because everything that you do becomes a way to like burn vasana. And whatever triggers you no longer becomes an impediment. It becomes, in fact, it's like, oh my God, there's something that triggers me. I want to dive right in, rather than like, I don't want to engage with it, And that's the beauty of it. Then people start to say, what, I've seen like so many people in my who have done this work, and like they're always doing things which seem crazy. Just like, what? Like, how are you doing that? It's because they're like, oh, because I feel I had an aversion to it. So I want to like do it to see that actually I don't want to hold on to any aversion. I don't want any aversions, and I don't want any attachments. I want, if there is an attachment and an aversion, see clearly like what is going on. Like, why am I attached to this? What about this thing am I averse to? So it could be something like, giving a massive presentation. It could be something like even work-wise, right? Like there are some things in our day-to-day in our work where you're just like, oh no, I don't want to do that. That seems, so there's always these certain like things we want to be very focused and like clear about, like, or conscious about what is going on. What are my motivations? And once you start to see that, like life will just like transform for you, because the bliss is inside, and outside is nothing. So then it's like all about how can I digest. It's like about digesting things, unprocessed things. In the end, we are eating physical food, but you're also eating mental food all the time. And these mental food, we're not digesting very well. So we're going to start to digest those mental impressions that we have. And those undigested mental impressions are vasanas, essentially, which is, I wasn't conscious when I was actually engaging with that thing. So this is hopefully like, some of this starts to give you a taste of what the work is. So the yoga is not just done in your meditation seat or in class here. Like this is just inspiration, but you got to go out and do it in your day to day. That's where all your attachments show up, all your aversions show up. And life is giving you exactly what you need. That's like another crazy thing, which is like right now, whatever is happening in your life, if you're feeling miserable or if you're feeling, whatever emotion, why are you feeling those emotions? And instead of running away from that, dive into it and see what is it what am I to see here? What is life telling me? Because there is deep intelligence. Think about it. This world is magical if you think about every moment. You're breathing, you're like, it's a miracle. I feel like every moment is a miracle. And we are like living in this thought about like how life should be rather than being with the miracle of life itself. And that's what we want to start to withdraw our attention from this stupid movie that we are constantly engaging in and start to live from the place of like the spark of joy, the divine spark that lives within us. Like imagine if you can get to a place where every moment you're just living from that divine source of creation or the source of life itself. How can any moment be boring? How? Right? Like even like boredom is like such an interesting idea, which is like your attention is on the movie and you're not liking the movie. That's basically what boredom is. Or like it's like very interesting. So you start to notice that what is boredom, what is all these emotions that I'm feeling. Start to get familiar with each of those emotions and see what is going on, because in the end it's just garbage actually that we have believed. So we want to start to see that it's just an unexamined ideas from the past coming up. And the way out is the way in. It's kind of like that. You want to dive in into and just dissolve it. You'll see that they're just like clouds. They don't have any substance. And